Hello, you're very welcome to the first ever episode of Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain. My name is Sabina Brennan. I'm a neuroscientist, psychologist, and author of the #1 bestseller, 100 Days to a Younger Brain. I'm so pleased that you've decided to tune in. You're in for a treat because this week I chat to Irish Times columnist, playwright, and author Hilary Fannin. Hilary and I had never met before recording today's episode. I contacted her by email to invite her to be a Superbrain guest. We then spoke on the phone. I think Hilary wanted to make sure that I wasn't some sort of crazy woman. Anyway, we got on like a house on fire and could have talked for hours, but we decided to cut our phone conversation short so that we could share our first chat with you. I have to tell you that Hilary is my kind of superbrain. From the age of 4 and throughout her childhood, she was branded as a stupid and weak child, and ultimately ended up being expelled from school at the ripe old age of 11. Despite this, Hilary found her superbrain and is now an award-winning columnist, an accomplished playwright, and most recently an author. Hilary even fulfilled her dream of going to university in her mid-50s. In this episode, we talk about her belligerent resilience, her road to writing success, acting, creativity, motherhood, life in general, and making work happen. I hope you enjoy today's show. Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that I'd really like to talk to you about, and that's actually about going to university in your 50s. You kind of beat me. I went to university in my 40s and kind of felt that was something really unusual to do. But there's a few things. You actually wrote about that in one of your articles in the Irish Times. And a couple of things that jumped out to me about that was, that you often talk to people about your own journey, and part of that journey being going to university in your 50s, and that you hear a lot of stories of loss, often from women.
I mean, for me, I never went to college. I left school in 1979. I'm 57 now, I'm going to be 58 in May. And so I left school in 79. And I mean, I don't know the exact percentages, but I think a very small percentage of girls from my convent school actually went to university. A lot of women went into nursing or teaching, and, there were different ways into those professions at that time. For me, I didn't do any of those things. I was waitressing and stuff. And for my whole life, I had that sensation of missing something. Was missing some component, which was time, I think. Just time to be able to read and to think and to be, to have some kind of freedom, But I think I was idealising a student life or a student experience. I remember when I met my husband when I was in my 30s, and talking to him about his university life, and he just he'd sleep on the beach and read books and stuff like that. And I thought, and I was working in childcare, and I was working in sluice rooms and kitchens and stuff, and I had that sensation of really wanting something. So when I went to university, for me it was really mind-blowing. It was wonderful. Subsequently, and we can come back to that, but I'm a chatter, I chat to people. Mm-hmm. I meet women of my age, and a lot of them who, like me, came out of school in the late 70s, when there was no free education for a start, when the expectations, I think, for young women was quite different than it is now. And certainly in the convent school I went to, there was kind of a sense that we were cooked, we were ready to go out and get married. And, our lives are not static, and that sense of loss that I experienced, I've heard reflected back to me from other women of my age who maybe never fulfilled their potential. Mm-hmm. Women who maybe, I know I have this odd thing of having several friends who work as secretaries to doctors and as hospital secretaries in clinics, and every one of them would have made a brilliant clinician. Mm-hmm. But I don't think our ambitions were heard. I don't think we were fostered. I don't think we were held in the ways we should have been.
I think, it resonates totally with me. for those listening, I left school in 1979. I'm 57. I love the expression that you've just said, that we're cooked. Now, I actually did my leaving. You would have just turned 17 before the exams. I turned 17 after the exams, so technically I left school at 16.
Yeah.
And we're supposedly fully cooked. I had no idea who I was. Like you know, and I think we were just saying before we started recording that both of us, you know, when we did our leaving cert, you know, there was nobody even asking you what your exams were or what you had to study for. And I think my parents went on holidays delighted that now I was old enough to be in the house without them there. And they were away when I got my leaving cert results. I think they were in the Isle of Man, and I waited for them to call to tell them what I got, like, and it was, oh great, and there was no sense of university. I don't know if you recall, like, it was, if you could get a job as a woman, I mean, a lot of the girls in my class would have been encouraged to leave after the intercert, which is what it was called then, now the junior cert, to go to commercial college, which was to learn how to type, because that was a great job for women. Some of us, and there was lots, as you say, really, really smart women, or girls as we were then. But I think I'd say I know of 3, 4, 5 maybe out of our entire year who went to university.
Exactly.
And generally they were the daughters of professionals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whose parents were already.
We had our 40-year school reunion. Was it 40?
Yeah, we had ours in October too. It's scary.
October, yeah. And it was really interesting, you know, and I kind of wrote about that as well. But we know in the end, you know, I was one of the last to leave, as usual. I'm kind of sitting around talking about our lives and the kind of lives that we experienced. And just like that, it was the doctor's daughter went to UCD and did languages. But there was a tiny percentage of us who had gone on to third level. Tiny.
Have you found, now I have noticed more and more of my peers have actually gone to university now that our kids have grown up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's wonderful to see.
And pursued education, you know, maybe not so formally, you know, in terms of going into college, but have continued to evolve and continue to make new tracks for themselves, you know. And it is exactly that freedom that you talked about. I mean, for me, the impetus, what finally made me go to university was a couple of things happened. My mother had been really ill for about 18 months, and my son was like, I don't know, 15, 16. My youngest son was 15 or 16. My mother was really ill. I was working, I was kind of running from one space to another space to try and facilitate lots of people and to make trying to do my own work in the middle. And I just got really tired and I felt very despondent. You know, I felt very low, which lost. I don't normally feel very low. Yeah, I felt kind of lost. And then I went to a talk in Dunleary Library, beautiful, the Lexicon Library out in Dunleary. And I'm a North Sider, so I had to travel. But anyway, there was a writer talking about his experience of teaching creative writing. And his name will come back to me in a minute. But he was saying that in his class, and he teaches in Syracuse University in New York, and he said that in his class he loves seeing older students because what they bring with them is a wealth of experience about life and a perspective that isn't available to younger students, especially in a subject like creative writing. And I listened to him talk and I thought, I want to go to Syracuse and be a student of his. And then I went home and I thought, okay, you have to feed your 15-year-old and you have to see your mother and you have to stay here and pay the mortgage, blah, blah. You can't go to Syracuse. What can you do? And then I went onto the Trinity website and I saw that they had a creative writing course in the Oscar Wilde Centre. So I just wrote to them and I said, I left school. I wasn't allowed into the honours English class in school. I was hopelessly weak at my academic life. And so because my overall results were so low, I wasn't allowed into the streams that did higher English. Yeah. So I had to do, Anyway,
which is incredible, and I think it's just,
You know,
I know
it's just
I know you're
mad,
going to
like-
make another point, but I just think that is just mad about our system.
Yeah.
That someone who can write so amazingly well as you can. I mean, really, your way with words, your ability to draw people in and to create people and to create atmosphere is incredible. And to think that in our schools, that, well, it's incredible in two ways. Number one, that nobody could see that to nurture it, and number two, that you were so resilient that you didn't let what the teacher said to you in school stick. That I'm no good at English. I can't do English. It's not my thing. I'm no good at English. You actually you were able to achieve your own potential. But what breaks my heart is not everybody has that resilience.
Yeah, I mean, I was belligerently resilient, and I'm not. But I remember on the day of the leaving cert, I don't know. There was the blue paper for pass,
Yes, and the pink
one for honours, and the invigilator, who didn't know us from the back of the bus, said, hands up for the honours paper. So I just put my hand up.
Did you really?
One, yeah. And it was the only honour I got in my leaving
Oh my
cert.
God, that's incredible. And you hadn't even been in the class studying for it.
No. I know I got it on the essay, but I got a C. But I mean, man, it really meant a lot to me. But I was in trouble. I was in trouble for doing that. But anyway, look, that's neither here nor there. What happened was, I wrote to Trinity and I said, look, I don't think I actually passed my leaving. I haven't been in college, but I work as a columnist and playwright and stuff, and I'm just wondering, could I do the creative writing course, or could I come in and do English on any level? And they wrote back and said, you can come straight in and do the masters.
It's fantastic.
So they were really, really kind to me. So I had a year. And the mad thing was that my mother was ill, and I was supposed to be starting college in September.
Mm-hmm.
And it was August, and she was alive, but barely alive. And I had a frozen shoulder, there's just all this stress about it. And I just thought, right, I was going to pick up the phone to these people and say, thank you very much for the offer of the masters, but I actually can't do it. There's just too much going on in my life right now, and I'm not able to do it. And then she died.
Right.
And she just, 1 minute she was alive and the next one she was dead, which is kind of what happened.
I know, but it's funny when it comes to that. It's like
she's gone. Yeah. And I have dealt with the fallout of her loss over the last 2 years. It's hit me in ways that were really unexpected, because we didn't have a straightforward kind of relationship. But at that time, she was gone, and my husband had taken early retirement from the Irish Times where he worked, and suddenly, and then my eldest son said, actually, I want to go and live in London for a while. And then there was just my youngest son there, and he was in school, and I thought, oh my God, I can do this. I can get on a train in the morning, and I don't have to think about anybody else. And I don't remember the last time that happened to me.
I think that's a woman's thing. I mean, I just, and sorry if this is in any way offensive to any men listening, because I have entirely all men in my life, wonderful men, too. My husband and 2 sons. But I think it's because what you say resonate with me, and so I'm sure it resonates with tons of women, is that always putting our kids and our obligations first.
Yeah.
And I remember a few years ago, and that's not good, because I certainly know through certain stages for me over parenting where now this sounds awful to say, but it's honest and truthful, I resented my kids. I never not loved them. I never not, and that wasn't about them. That was really probably more about me, that I didn't realise that actually, in order to be, and I remember reading an article that said, if you don't put yourself first as a mother, you're failing your children.
And I remember a friend of mine saying to me that sometimes she would be hungry. It might be, mealtime, and she would be hungry, and then she'd feed her children, and then she wouldn't be hungry anymore. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really interesting physicalization of that you know, because I know that feeling. You know, you're cooking, you know, it's dinner time, you know, people are, and you think, and then you suddenly realise, my God, I haven't eaten. You know, when your children are smaller, you know, you've been picking spaghetti up off the floor or whatever, and then, you know, by the time it gets to you, you go, oh man, I can just, you know,
or you haven't spoken to anybody. You haven't spoken to an adult. I mean, I used to, gosh, and it's kind of what you're saying there, the feeling low, and that's why I kind of sort of said lost in a way to you when you were talking, because I do think in some way you lose yourself. You become a mother and you become a wife, and then somehow you do lose yourself, and you kind of, there can be a sense that, and I feel I have to kind of preface by saying I absolutely loved my kids and loved bringing them up, and loved kind of putting them there. But I do remember, I can still see the chair, we don't have it anymore. I had a blue armchair beside the window that looked out the back garden, and I used to sit there when the kids were playing. You should have lots of play dates and everything, and I would just sit and look out the garden, and just I don't even know what I thought, but just that. I was almost even, and I don't think I articulated it as, is this it? But it was almost, where am I? Or I don't know. And I mean, I would have only I had my kids very early, so I'm thinking I was only in my early 30s thinking that. But I remember, and I can still say that now, I think for me, because I had my kids early and you know, got married much younger than my friends. And I had that thing of seeing them still doing stuff. That turning 30 was probably harder for me than turning 40, because I was kind of coming out the other side a little bit, and I had actually given up my day job to actually pursue a career in acting at that point. So I was kind of already starting to reclaim a little bit of myself. But I think you can get lost, and I think it's, I'd love people listening here that maybe are still in the midst of that to kind of realise that actually life does get better with each decade. And it's not downhill. I
had a red chair beside my window. And my kids would run out, and there was a communal green behind our house, you know, and all the kids be out there playing, and I'd sit in the red chair and think, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Come on, Mum. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? My friend doesn't have that. She's working full time. She's paying crash fees. She's paying my rent. She's sitting on the M50. You know what I mean? And so, you know, there are many, we experience motherhood in many different ways. I think having children was the toughest challenge for me. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. It was much harder than writing books. My God, Jesus. No, sorry. Jeepers.
It's okay. It's okay. It's a podcast.
You know, it was really, and I didn't think it was going to be as hard as it was, but it was really hard.
Yeah, it is quite challenging. And actually, that's something that I've said in terms, I don't know about you, when I went to university, and I kind of went to university by accident, actually, really. I had, I used to act in a soap, and my part came to an end, and Ireland's very small when it comes to acting, and it was quite a high profile part, and you know, the kind of casting agent said, look, it's going to be a little while before you get anything, and I thought I might do a night course. I'm not very good at doing nothing. In fact, that's the hardest thing I think about being an actor, is doing nothing, is not working. The working is fantastic, and I said, no, I have to do something, and I thought I would do a night course, and I applied to do a night course, and the day I rang, I knew nothing about CAO or deadlines or anything like that, and I had rung apparently the day after the applications had closed. Anyway, long story short, apparently matures were allowed to apply later, and I rang about a night course, and they said, well, our mature applications for our psychology day course are still open. And I applied, and I got in, and I thought, well, it was 13 hours a week. I thought, I can still act, I can still do whatever, but I just then loved oh my God.
Did you love it?
Oh, I do you know what? I drove.
Did you go to Trinity?
No, I actually went. Trinity was a 4-year course, and I'd missed their deadline completely. So I did 3 years in Maynooth, and then I got a scholarship to do my PhD in Trinity. So I did my PhD in Trinity. But the undergrad, oh my God, I ate the books. I had them all read before and I drove the other students insane. And actually afterwards, some of the lecturers said to me, we used to be terrified going into lectures with you, because we're asking questions that they didn't. And it's only...
that's brilliant though, but that's fantastic.
It was just hunger. It was... No, I enjoyed my undergrad much more than I enjoyed my PhD. PhD is very, very lonely. And you're on your own. But I just... And you're the one who's discovering the information, which is kind of nice in a way, but I was still hungry for knowledge. That's what I loved about psychology, was just reading and taking information.
And was it random that you did psychology? If they'd said, look, our applications are open for,
No, so I was ringing about a course in psychology. So actually, and a lot of people said that to me, you're leaving, God, what a big jump going from acting to psychology. And I went, no, it's the exact same.
I was going to say, it's entirely linked, yeah.
And which I'm sure it's very much what drives you, but based on what I've read from you, is you're interested in the human condition.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've just always been interested in that. My dad used to have some big books on the shelf, and they were around things like I can see, genetics. What is his name? Mendel did the P genetics. Discovered how we get eye color, and but it was also, this book was kind of a mixture of science and anthropology, and how we came from the apes or whatever. And I used to pore over that as a child and thought it was fascinating. So for me, that's what psychology was about, was just understanding the human condition. And
as an actor, that's exactly what you do. And I was an actor for years because, you didn't need any qualifications to be an actor, basically, luck and, whatever. But it was just about going into training yourself to think in a different way,
being somebody else. Yeah, I often wondered, and I'm curious now to ask that, because it was again going through and reading your stuff. I mean, you're again as well. This is what I love about women that I come across, is that you can't, and I'm sure you get this, when people say, what are you? And you might say, if you're interviewing someone, they might say, oh, I'm a cardiologist, or I'm a this. When you come across women, it's like you, I'm kind of saying, you're a writer, you were an actor, you're a playwright, you're an author. Do you know what I mean? Like, women have so many.
But so much of that is just a practical, is come back to that thing of being, I had 2 sons as well, and, childcare, I don't know why I didn't think of it really. But, it wasn't an option financially, and they went to kind of crash in the morning for a bit, and I tried to write, and then they wouldn't want to go, and then I'd be, anyway, look, So you buttoned together some kind of career, and for me, I became an actor, just about managed to kind of keep my head above water as an actor, but by the time I got to my 30s, it was really difficult. And we had a group of us had come together and created our own theatre company. And some of those people, like Owen Rowe, who's really probably our country's best actor now. Owen was one of them. Was one of those people. Michelle Forbes, who's a novelist and an actor who's married to Owen. Anyway, there were a bunch of us, and we created our own work, because there was no work, and it was the 1980s in Dublin, and everybody was gone, and the city was practically empty, and there was some space in Downham Project for content. So we wrote our own work, we choreographed our own work, we designed our own work, we wrote our own music, we put our work on, and that work developed then, and we started working with Dermot Bulger, the writer Dermot Bulger, and we did an adaptation of Queen Arthur Lyra, and we brought that play to Edinburgh. We won in Edinburgh first. Wow. Fringe first. We went down to London. We were playing in London. Basically, we kind of insisted on having, again, a voice, insisted on having some kind of response, and we made our work. But that dries up, and I was very lucky. I had work in the Abbey and especially in the Peacock.
You also did TV.
I did TV. I did quite a bit of TV.
Upwardly mobile.
I know Pamela.
Oh my goodness! I hadn't connected, and it popped up last night. I went, oh my God! Now I know. That was great.
No, it was great. But it was
great drama.
But it's the kind of thing. I mean, being an actor, as you know, you're kind of on your toes because you don't know what's going to happen. And there was some very interesting experimental work going on in the Peacock with Tom McIntyre, who died recently, the playwright, and Michael Harding, who's now a columnist with the Irish Times, who's a playwright as well then. And I was very lucky to be involved at that time. Patrick Mason was the artistic director for a short period of time. And in that time, it was a very interesting, fecund kind of period, especially in the Peacock. And I did that work. But again, that dried up. And it dried up because the artistic direction of the theatre changed, and all the time when you're an actor, you're bigger movements are changing your world all the time, your working world. Then
Don't you think also, sorry, just to cut across you there, just going back to that, because it's a long time since I was an actor really, but that what used to bother me, and I was quite helpless. I love hearing that you had a group of people. At that point when I was acting, my kids were quite small, and my parents were meant to look after them initially so that I could pursue, because I had a full-time day job that I gave up to become an actor.
Right, okay.
And which was a big jump. I had got a place in the Gaiety School of Acting, but I couldn't. I had to turn it down because I couldn't afford to do it. And that's where Colin Farrell studied, and I couldn't afford to do it. And they said they actually called me back and said, "We'd really love you in the Gaiety School of Acting, so we'll let you pay by the month." And I said, "That's fine, but who's going to pay my mortgage?"
Yeah.
And that was a regret I had for a very long time, that I should have just found a way to pay my mortgage. Instead, I just gave up work and tried to become an actor by myself. Whereas had I gone to the Gaiety School of Acting, doors would have opened.
Well, you would have had a cohort.
Yeah.
And I think that this is the thing.
I think that's the thing.
And I do think it's probably the only. No, I shouldn't say that, but it's one of the most important things about training, actor training, is that you have some kind of cohort. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I started, there was no Gaiety School, and there was no Lear, or there was no, any of them. But there was the Oscar Theatre School, which was run on the weekends, and we used to call it the Oscar School of Motoring because, really, it was very random. But it was there that I met Owen and Michelle and Lynn and Bert and Paul and all these people who became my mates, and we created our own world.
So that was kind of your university. You see, if I think about that, because I kind of didn't. Time. When you were talking earlier about not having that cohort at university, I missed that, and I never had that either. But I'm seeing that you actually did. You created your own in a way. I never did that, and I do think that's something that I missed also. That it's always felt sort of alone, but that's just.
I think having those mates, and I don't know if you remember, in the 80s, as I was saying, everyone was skint, but the government, if you were signing on, you got a kind of stipend. It was like it was like a FOSS scheme, know. So we kind of set up our own theatre company by kind of pooling our FOSS scheme money.
Wow.
And we got some premises together and Little Black Box Theatre up off Herbert Street, and excuse me, and again create our own work. But if I look at the thread through all of that, through that early time of creating our own work, through the time of working in the Peacock with new writers, through to going to London, and through to realising that kind of period had finished, the thread that kept me going was writing, because I was always either listening to writers talking about their work or working in some collaborative way around creating scripts, and working in an ensemble. And when in rehearsal, you can really absorb so much. And I was probably absorbing more about the kind of creation of theatre than I was about the performance. I was more interested in the play, really, than in the performance. I mean, I loved being on stage, and sometimes, and then other times I didn't. Yeah,
theatre was never my driver. Tough. Yeah, I mean, I loved television and film, because for me, the joy was in the creating, the discovery. What is it that's making this person say this thing? Why are they behaving this way? And understanding. And for me, then the joy came from, I've got and being lost in it, becoming that person, and putting that out there. And then it was right next. I don't want to do that every night. I've done that now. Give me another challenge.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I mean? I didn't want to do it every night. That didn't really interest me. And also it never and I did do theatre. It never interested me. If people stood up and gave you a standing ovation, if I felt I was crap.
No, it's very you self-regulate, but I hear you, but I think that theatre, it's a very interesting thing, because it's the intensity. You do enter the world, but the world doesn't repeat itself in the same way night after night.
No,
And there is an exploration, and when you're part of an ensemble and you're in a play, in a big play or a small play, that world is very consuming, and the nuances change, and So you have great performances, you've got crap performances, you've got nights you feel good, nights you don't feel so good. But it's so absorbing. It's just so absorbing. And the world of it is very enclosed once you're in there, in the rehearsal room and
like
on
a
stage.
family.
It becomes like a family. And again, I think I was looking to create some kind of control, to be in an environment that there was some, and maybe the repetition felt like control, which was interesting.
Comfortable.
Yeah, it was boundaried. There was a boundaried experience that you were living a boundaried, you were inhabiting a boundaried kind of experience night after night. And that really interested me. Television, I got telly. Oh man, I was thrilled to get telly because it paid so much better than theatre.
Which didn't often pay sometimes.
And, and I did various bits of telly and over the years, but I enjoyed myself and had a great time and everything, but it didn't feel the same. But my first son was born when I was doing Upwardly Mobile, and I remember we did the first season and then we were given the green light for a second season. And meanwhile, I was pregnant. I realised I was pregnant. I was thinking, all right, better. What I'm going to do now? And so I said to them, I'm pregnant actually. And my character, Pamela, I don't think she was supposed to ever have sex, let alone get pregnant, And so I said, I'm actually pregnant. And they went, okay, when's the baby due? And I knew that we were back in work at the end of August. So I said, summer. And they said, okay, fine, well, that's fine then, yeah. Anyway, Pete was born 6th of August and we were in rehearsal, like we're back 2 weeks later. And I remember walking down Wicklow Street in this big, huge purple jumpsuit. I was pregnant. And I looked like a Teletubby and I couldn't see my own feet. I was so enormous. And I saw the producer walking towards me and he hadn't seen me. And I tried to get my massive bulk inside a shop really fast before he realised, God, there's Pamela, like a Michelin man. And so anyway, I went back to work, but they just stood me behind a chair. For the second series. Most of the second series, I'm standing behind a chair.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But it was, but I didn't have, I was literally,
no maternity leave, straight in.
No maternity leave.
Yeah. That was challenging. And your first time mother.
First time mother, yeah.
That's a huge challenge. I want to go back a tiny bit to creativity because I'm really interested in creativity from actually a brain perspective, where our creativity comes from. And I totally get that other people and actually it's that's why society and being social is actually played a huge role in our evolution and in actually our frontal lobes and our brains becoming bigger and bigger and more complex, because through that interaction. So perhaps we started making tools, but if we're making them around fire, you seeing what someone else is doing, and then something sparks an idea, and that's something that we know of that happened. And I think that kind of applies to creativity. And I'm a firm believer in that there's no such thing as a bad idea, and if you're in a group, just throw out all ideas because the worst idea in the world could spark the best. And that's where I think there should be freedom, around ideas. But I'm also interested in, because obviously you don't write, your articles or your books collaboratively. They're all entirely. So that kind of creativity, do you know? Have you figured yourself where that comes from, or what your process is, or is there a process, or what moments do your ideas come to you in?
Well, I was saying, I think the thing that I think when I looked back, when I don't know what I did when I started writing. Peter was born when I was 34. And I wrote a play really, really quickly while I was pregnant at that point and when I was doing Upwardly Mobile, because I figured that I really suddenly knew I wanted to be a writer. And I figured if I don't write something really, really fast before this baby is born, other stuff is going to come in here and it's going to absorb something that I know I have that feels really intangible, but I'm aware of it. I was aware of having this kind of space of my own, even when I was working collaboratively with other people.
Right.
It was like having a room in my own head.
Okay.
So I felt that, I suddenly thought, oh man, my room is going to be invaded. Like, my room wasn't going to be invaded by other people's productions or telework or whatever, learning to drive or whatever. You know what I mean? But I knew instinctively that a baby was going to walk right into that room and start kicking it around. Right. And, you know.
Was that a room that you escaped into?
I think I have had that space.
Since you were a child?
Since I was a child, because I had quite a chaotic, chaotic, it's relative, isn't it? There were things in my childhood that were very difficult to manage. And so I created a space to be in, you know, and it wasn't like walking in and sitting down in the space and looking around the walls and stuff, but it was a sensation of privacy, of having a space that was private, you know. And I knew that when I had a baby that space was going to change. So I lashed out a play really fast, sent it to the Bush Theatre, and got a letter back to say, we're going to do this play. Wow. It was the first play I've written. And I was but it was almost like, I know this, I don't mean this to sound arrogant, but it was like I knew that had to happen, because I knew that I had to somehow hook the next bit of my life. Yeah. I knew that I had a very short time to throw the line out, and I was going to have to be really accurate. And I needed to make a firm decision about where that line was been thrown. Yeah. I needed to make the right throw, and I needed to make it in the right direction. And I just whacked it out. Bush Theatre play, on. Got a really good literary agent over there, and then went into labour. Wow. But it's like, it's a kind of thing of needing to control things. Like, no. And
I get that. And there's two things I want to follow up on that, in that, number one, and I would certainly have experience like that. And I'm not saying that being pregnant was a crisis, but it's a turning point. It's a change. It's a, whoa, things are going to change. And that makes those things, so it's an impending birth, similar to when somebody dies, when you lose a job. Big things like, or when you're considering, oh, will I get married? Those big things take you out of the moment and make you start to think about, where am I going? What will that? You have that bigger picture thing, and I see them as very positive, because they do get you to focus on who you are. And I often wish, and it's an interesting thing in the human condition, that we don't do that. We coast along. We're half present, and it's only when something desperate, strikes that it jolts us into the present and makes us realise. In a way, it's about facing your own mortality and realising you've only got X amount of years. What are you going to do with them? And I just wish somehow we could, as human beings, keep that focus, keep that, oh my God, what am I going to do today? Instead of so many people, oh my God, I've got to get up today. And actually, you know what, today is a day. It's a day you have, do something with it. So it's fab to hear that. The second thing that I'm really interested in is that you were able to be so focused, so creative, and obviously do a superb job really quickly while you were pregnant. Because frequently, I know for me, my brain went to mush when I was pregnant, to the extent of doing funny things, strange things, like driving up the, going through a red light thinking, oh yeah, now it's my turn. Do you know what I mean? Where that I wasn't making proper sense of the world, but you had a clarity.
I had between seasons of Upperly Mobile, because my husband is a Londoner, and at the time we weren't married, and we were kind of a bit coming and going and stuff. But between seasons, I went over to London and I did a course for a couple of weeks in the City Lit with Bernard Copps, who's a playwright. He's an elderly playwright. He was colleague of Wesker and stuff, and he was a very fantastic kind of teacher, mentor. And I had begun a play. So I had ideas, I had thought about structure, but also, it wasn't that difficult, because I was really writing very autobiographically. Right. So I had the bones of a play there when I was pregnant, but I just made myself focus.
Put it down.
And put it down.
So would you say it had been marinating in your head for a very long time?
Forever. forever. From the time I opened my eyes and started looking around me. Yeah.
So for me, just kind of pinning that back a bit, what's interesting is there's your brain cells communicate with each other through electrical and chemical signals. And so it's all electrical activity in your brain. You've 86 billion neurons and trillions of connections between them. And, depending on what activity you're engaged in, most of them are working kind of all the time, but different areas are responsible for different things. But there's a really interesting phenomenon whereby if you go into a relaxed state where you're not actively engaged in something, right?
Yeah.
Call it daydreaming, whatever, but just perhaps when you're sitting in your red chair, just sort of just being, not actively thinking what are we going to have for dinner, or not actively engaged in something. Some areas of the brain become more active than other areas, than when we're actually actively engaged. And it's a network across the brain, right? It's a network of activity, and particular activity comes in, and it's called scientifically the default mode network. And it just happens during that period of relaxation. And that, we think, is actually where creativity, insight, and ideas lie. And what it is your brain doing its own thing. It's connecting all the dots, so kind of connecting everything together, and it's I call it marinating, actually. And I kind of say to people, look, I actually gave a talk recently to a bunch of architects about brain health, and I was, kind of always make my talks focused on what the person is working on. And architecture is a very demanding profession, lots of deadlines, timelines, and lots of creativity required. And I was just saying to them, instead of always trying to force the idea that I need to be creative, I need to figure this out, I need to do that out, that's just our conscious brain trying to figure something out. If you actually trust your brain and say, I have 30 years of knowledge in there. I'm going to feed in, actually, you know what? These are the issues, problems that I need to figure out for this building. Leaving it to you. Going to take time out to relax, chill. I'm going to sleep. Something very similar happens when we sleep. During REM sleep, that dream sleep, is new information being connected with all your previous knowledge and experience. So that's why you kind of get those odd dreams sometimes of something happening that happened today mixed in with something from your childhood. It's your new memories are consolidated sort of earlier in the evening in sleep, in non-REM sleep, and then when you have more REM sleep, it's integrated with all your, which is why you can sometimes wake in the morning with the solution. So sleep and actually taking time out are critical kind of to creativity. And that's kind of what I said to you. In those moments you were throughout your life just letting that stuff was just marinating, your brain was creating it. So actually what you just needed to do was then just get to that physical point of get this out of here and onto the page.
Anne Wright, who's just a fantastic writer, and she said to me a couple of years ago, just turn up. All you need to do is turn up. Just turn up to the page. Really, just. But it's so difficult sometimes for people to turn up to whatever it is. Just to allow themselves the self-belief that what they have to say or draw or make matters. In some way.
And I think as well, what I'm learning as a novice writer now is that the just turn up is super important. And I sit there and sometimes I get nothing, but
you're there, though.
I do research. But also what I've decided to do, because I have a really short deadline, is I have to write X number every day, and I'm kind of doing that. And when I wrote my first book, I perfected every single paragraph before I could move to the next. I had a bit more time to write it. Now I'm learning and what I'm doing this time is I'm getting something down on the page. It has the core of what I need to say, but it's
could be sloppy.
Yeah. You know, it's just there. It's information. It's not necessarily a nice read. Sometimes it comes out that way. But what I do is I'm doing that and then I'm moving on. But actually what's happening is my brain has that problem in its head of what was wrong with that paragraph or you know. So then I kind of, might be 3 days later I start and I kind of go, you know what? And I go back to that bit and something happens where I can go, gosh, that's really clunky. Here's how I can just say it. And it works. So I don't think, had I not written the really awful stuff, my brain wouldn't have the information to know what to fix.
To play around with.
Yeah. So I do think that's, you know, and you hear it pretty much from every single wonderful author that you admire, is just, you got to write every day.
You got to be there. You got to be there. You just got to be, you really have to be there. And it's harder than it seems.
Yeah, and it's very easy to procrastinate. If you take anything away from this episode, let it be that, well, and I'm stealing Hilary's words here, it's never too late to silence the childhood voices of discouragement. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first ever episode of Superbrain. For regular updates and bonus material, follow Superbrain Podcast on Instagram and at Sabina_Brennan on Twitter. Subscribe to Superbrain on Apple, Spotify, Google, Acast, or wherever you consume your podcasts. And remember, if you loved it, rate it, review it, share it. My name is Sabina Brennan, and you've been listening to Superbrain, the podcast for everyone with a brain.